Good morning and welcome to another episode on the future of Europe. I am Mam Touré, your host, and today we have a very special guest joining us, Julien LAURENT. Julien is a student at the Université Catholique of Lille in the Master International and European Law. And we'll be discussing a pivotal case in sports governance, European Super League versus FIFA and UEFA on the EU competition law. It's a privilege to have you with us, Julien. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
The European Super League case has been a major legal battle. How exactly did the European Super League challenge FIFA and UEFA's authority on the EU competition law?
Well, the Super League's main argument in that case was that FIFA and UEFA were acting like a monopoly in football. Their rules required clubs to get prior approval before creating any new competition, and they used threats towards clubs and players with severe sanctions if they were part of any unallowed competition. From a legal standpoint, the club behind the Super League argued that this violated EU competition law, more specifically Articles 101 and 102 Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, TFEU. And their claim was that FIFA and UEFA were abusing their dominant position by blocking competition and restricting clubs' freedom of enterprise. They also pointed out that this wasn't just about business, it's about consumer choice, because a breakaway league could offer a different kind of competition to the fans. A key legal question in this case was whether UEFA's rules could be justified under the Wouters precedent. In Wouters, in fact, the court recognized that some restrictions on competition could be allowed if they pursued a legitimate objective and were necessary and proportionate. However, the Super League clubs argued that FIFA and UEFA's rules they went beyond what was strictly necessary and were purely aiming at protecting their own commercial interests rather than maintaining integrity in sports. So the big legal issue here was that is UEFA regulating football in a fair and necessary way, or are they unfairly protecting their own commercial interests by blocking competition? That's what the court had to decide.
Following your line of thoughts, how did the Court of Justice of the European Union view FIFA and UEFA's role in football governance?
Well, the court actually acknowledged that FIFA and UEFA hold a dominant position, meaning they control the organization of football in Europe. But the key point is that being dominant isn't illegal under EU law. Abusing that dominant position is. So what the court found problematic in that case was that UEFA and FIFA had absolute control over who could organize football competitions without any clear rules or transparent criteria for approving or rejecting such projects. That meant they could arbitrarily block any rival competition like the Super League project without having to justify their decision. The ruling in that case was based on a precedent called Mecca Medina framework, which applies competition law to sports governance. The court assessed whether UEFA and FIFA were first pursuing a legitimate objective, such as maintaining sports integrity of football, more precisely, sorry. And secondly, these restrictions have to be deemed strictly necessary and proportionate, as I was telling you, to achieve that objective. Here, the court found that UEFA's system lacked transparency and predictability, which allowed it to unfairly block competition. The ruling essentially said if you are in a dominant position, you have a special responsibility not to distort unfairly competition. Since FIFA and UEFA failed to justify their restrictive measures, well, their system was deemed anti-competitive.
From what I'm understanding from your answer, it sounds like proportionality and transparency played a key role in the court's ruling. Could you explain how?
Absolutely. These two principles were key to the ruling. First, on proportionality, the court looked at the threats of sanctions that FIFA and UEFA issued. They basically said, if you join the Super League project, you will be banned. But there was no limits to that. It could be domestic leagues, but also European championships, such as the Champions League, or even the World Cup. The court found this way too extreme. Some regulation, in fact, is fair and maybe even necessary. But these threats were disproportionate and clearly aimed at eliminating any potential competition. Then on transparency, the issue was that FIFA and UEFA's approval process was vague and unregulated. There were no clear rules on what criteria a new competition had to meet to get approved, which means that clubs had no real way of knowing whether their participation in such a potential competition would be legal under the eyes of UEFA's and FIFA's rules. In fact, this ties back to Mecca Medina precedent, where the court ruled that sports regulations must follow EU competition law. The key takeaway is if you're going to regulate competition, you need to have a fair, transparent, and predictable system. Otherwise, it's an abuse of power.
So what impact does this ruling have on the future of football and sports governance in Europe?
Well, thank you for that. It's an important question. This is an important ruling because it sets a big precedent for sports governance and how sports governance interacts with EU competition law. For UEFA and FIFA, it means they can't just block any new competitions without a proper justification. They may have to reform their rules to make the approval process more transparent and objective. It also means that they need to be careful about using sanctions as a weapon to protect their own interests. For clubs, this case opens the door for new competition models, and the Super League case in itself might not happen as it was initially planned. But this ruling makes it easier for clubs to challenge UEFA's control and explore alternative competitions. A useful parallel that I could give you is the Bosman case from 1995, which revolutionized the European football by allowing free movement of players at the end of their contracts. Indeed, it significantly impacted the relations between players and the control that clubs had over their players. Just like Bosman, this case reshaped players' rights and the transfer system, I think that the Super League case challenges the monopolistic power of governing bodies over club competitions. Both cases highlights the increasing role of EU law within the sports governance. Beyond football, this case could also impact other sports, such as Formula One, tennis, and the Olympics, because all these governing bodies are both regulators and commercial operators. This court's ruling sends also a clear message. Sports bodies can regulate, but they must do so in a way that respects EU competition law. So while UEFA is still in control, for now, this ruling might be the first one toward a more open and competitive landscape in European Union.
Thank you once again for sharing your insight with us. It has been a pleasure speaking with you, Mame Touré and Julien Laurent, on the sports governance under EU competition law.